All right, we're live. Kevin,
Hey, hey.
thanks so much for being on the show today. I appreciate you taking the time for this. Just to start things off, can you tell our agency listeners a little bit more about your background before we jump into some of the other questions, just so they kind of have a sense of, you know, where you're coming from and your credibility in this area?
Yeah, real quick backstory. Been freelancing since the early 2000s, started coding websites by hand and then made family and friend websites over the years, thinking it was sort of a hobby that kind of made some money. In 2014 or so, I realized, hey, there's actually a business here. I started building an agency while I had a corporate job in my evenings and weekends and sort of built up a couple clients. And then eventually made enough of a client roster to make the leap to full time. And so I did that, and I was a kind of a one man agency for a while, servicing B2B businesses primarily. And I kind of got to a phase where I was like, you know what? After a few years, I was spinning a lot of plates, and I was like, I either have to turn into a real agency here and start to hire, project managers and really build out a team, or I got to think about what I'm going to do. And I made a choice not to scale an agency and instead to kind of become what I think of as like a deconstructed agency, where I sell strategy and advice as an advisor, and I bring in different individuals and different agencies to help execute the strategy today. And so it's been an evolution, I ultimately followed what I could do best and what worked best for me. And since then, my business profit wise has taken off, and I've kind of avoided the need to hire a big full on agency, because eventually that's kind of where we all face and we have to do as a soloist. So that's my backstory in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, can you tell me a little bit about kind of what made you even think about uh, the consulting piece? Like, was it something where you did that on top of your agency services, and then you kind of realized, oh, I could phase one out and I could, do more of the other one?
Yeah, that was exactly how it was. Everything I do, I sort of phase into it. I try things. I always keep my main thing, the main thing, keep that running. But yeah, it was kind of a combination of reading some Alan Weiss. He's a consultant for consultants, and reading value-based fees in particular, which is super relevant even to agencies and how we do pricing. Combination of that and also reading Profit First by Mike Michalowicz, and kind of saying, like, built into every single engagement, you want to be thinking, how do I build my profit in first, then build in my time, then build in my costs, and basically, factor all of that in the price, which is kind of the opposite way to think about how you do pricing. But it was a mental model that makes sure you have enough profit at the end of the day and you're not an afterthought in your own business, which a
Hmm.
lot of agencies can fall into, because we tend to sell and then have a time and materials, and then that can eat up a lot of our money. So those two books kind of came together, and I was like, well, what if I just broke apart the thing that I do best, which is selling strategy, finding and vetting really high quality, talented individuals in their individual areas. And rather than me manage them and manage the projects and mark up their time and then have to sit kind of across the table from my clients, I said, what if I just sort of sold my thing? I'm sitting now on the side of my clients and helping be a co-buyer of the right services for them, and introducing them directly to one another, holding everyone accountable, looking at the analytics and measuring what works, and basically helping the client sit on their side of the table and make these financial decisions and how they go and invest these resources into marketing. And that I
Hmm.
found was a really nice. It changed the dynamic a little bit. It was less of a dog and pony show of here's what all the things we did this month, and more like here's what's happening, here's what we've installed, here's what we built, here's where we're headed, here's what our plan is, here's where I think we can save money, here's where I think we can spend money. So it was much more collaborative, because it didn't require changes of scopes and having to, like, it was just far less messy for both sides. And so that just worked really well for me and my style. And I took on one or two of those clients, and then I got two fractional CMO clients in the beginning, and then I started specializing in an industry vertical, the co-working industry, and started exclusively advising. And the rest is history. But that was sort of the path I took. So I kind of stumbled into this model. I hadn't even really heard of it, and I sort of was just like, if they do consulting in other spaces, they should be able to. I mean, they should apply to marketing too. And that's
Right.
kind of how I fell into it.
Nice. As far as the actual journey of, fully moving into that, you mentioned earlier that you've kind of done everything transitionally a little bit. Um, can you talk a little bit about, I mean, I guess, if there's agency people watching this or listening to this and they're wondering, well, how would I do that in my agency? Like, is it something where I have to pick one or the other, or is it something I can stack on top of what I already do? What are your
Yeah.
thoughts around kind of how an agency founder might apply what you've done?
Yeah, it's sort of the kind of overlap mentality. So usually every business can be made more efficient, whether it's by picking a more narrow target market or tightening up a service or spinning off a productized service that's really dialed in and specific for a specific type of audience person. And that can be really confusing if your agency is either broader and doesn't have a clearly defined niche or niche. For me, it was B2B and B2B services, which is still super broad, which meant I was doing all kinds of work for all kinds of people and I was offering all kinds of services. I was a web design and digital marketing agency, so you can just imagine the number of things I had to do. So typically speaking is if you see an area of opportunity, if you're going to double down and find, like, let's say you have a really good engagement, that's your bread and butter, and you want to spin that off and make it a very like single purpose tool, for example, or spin off the services you're currently doing to a very specific type of customer, that can be a very risky proposition to your business. And so it doesn't usually make sense to go whole hog and just like abandon the ships and burn the ships, like you may hear some people saying, and just
Yeah.
like double down on this new thing. Although that may help you get to results faster, it can also be way riskier. And it puts you in a position where you're a little more desperate and a little less financially stable and unsure. So what I usually recommend is, rather than confusing people with your current website, spinning off a business, maybe a business that's owned by your agency. So it's not like you're pretending to be two different people or two different companies. It might be like, here's our landing page service, and it's owned by the good folks at, Acme Agency Inc. or whatever. And so this, you can borrow credibility from where you are before, maybe a broader offering or positioning, and bring it into a new thing. And then you spend a lot of time marketing that new thing. You bring in your own, as the principals, as the agency owners and the employees. You want to kind of say, hey, we're doing this project, we're trying this out. We don't know if it's going to work, but we've had a lot of success in it, and so we're going to go double down on that. And so it's okay. The market is smart. They can see that you maybe are doing two different things, two different paths. Where it gets confusing is if you try to mesh those things together. And that's where people go, wait, like you can do it. There are cases where you can totally have that. In the case of, say, a landing page, if you're a web design business, that makes sense. But if you're going to go after a new niche, for example, that could be a great place to spin that off as a second thing and then just start promoting that separately altogether.
That makes a lot of sense. So as far as the consulting piece itself, like, I guess, what questions do you think an agency owner may want to ask themselves kind of when they're deciding, well, should I provide a consulting component to what we do? Is it,
really hard to sell consulting and implementation at the same time. Usually you're either doing upfront strategy work, which you pay for as a separate project, and then basically you're selling implementation thereafter, like intelligent implementation. Where it gets tricky is where you go, hey, I'm gonna advise you on your marketing. Maybe we're even gonna manage and lead it, but then our team is gonna then go and execute it. And so that dynamic I mentioned in the beginning, where you're sitting on the side of your clients and being like, look, I'm on your team. We're taking a fixed fee here. We're like a fiduciary financial advisor, as opposed to one that takes a percent of all the money that we,
right?
They're called suitability advisors. We're going to be like a fiduciary. So it's really hard to be like, yeah, here's all the things you should do. You should spend $30,000 on your website, not 20. And here's all the reasons why. Oh, and by the way, our agency is going to take that. Like, we're going to do that for you. So it kind of creates this dynamic where even if you are a well-intentioned service provider, which we all are, right? So I'm not here to pretend that people are overselling or anything of that nature, but it creates a dynamic where the client has to sort of fend for themselves, decide, do I really need this or not? It's kind of like going to the dentist when they're like, yeah, you got to pull out that tooth, and you're like, well, do I really need to now? Or is this like, how bad is this? Or you go to the vet and they introduce all the different scenarios where your dog or pet can get, some kind of obscure virus. And you're like, do I really need, do they need all these vaccines? So it's like, it just creates that dynamic where they feel like they have to do their own due diligence. And so that can be very difficult. So usually if you're going to do consulting, it's really hard to sell that and deliver the services at the same time. So sometimes what agency owners will do is they'll get tired of the agency model, like I did, and say, you know what, rather than continuing to scale out an agency, myself and maybe my partner, we're going to do a consultancy here. And then you can put that on a separate model under your own names. And then you run those things in parallel. But you basically say, which is what I did, instead of us marking up the time of implementation, we're going to introduce you to the folks that we used to mark up their time for and introduce you directly to them at cost, no markups, no backend referral fees, no affiliate commissions. And they're going to be your suppliers now. And so you're going to have those cost advantages, but you're going to pay us a premium to get all these systems and strategies and structures set up and running for you. And so that's why it's like a deconstructed agency, is because you're not making money on any of those things. You're facilitating, you're advising, you're producing, you're masterminding, you're strategizing, and you're clearing roadblocks, but you're not making money on the other half. So that's one way that you can consider branching into it. But usually it means cannibalizing your existing business to go and create a consultancy, which is just a very similar model, a more fun model in my biased opinion. But yeah, that's kind of how I see that going. There are obviously exceptions to this, like selling strategy up front, and then execution, which is much less valuable in a lot of ways after that.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I guess one question I have, so like if there was some sort of 80-20 split, like here's the 20% of the things that make, 80% of the difference, with regards to like going in this direction, what would you recommend to agencies?
In which way do you mean in terms of 80-20 split?
Just like, I guess, what are the highest impact next steps you could take if you're going to try to make the transition?
Transition to consulting, advising, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
I think the way I see it is there's 4 stages on this journey, if you will. There's execution, right, which is what we all do as freelancers and agency owners. There's management, which also agency owners do. So they'll manage all the marketing and they're going to do execution under one roof. Then there's advising, which is the strategy part, and then there's education. So if you're gonna no longer sell the execution part, the easiest next step on the chain is to be basically a fractional CMO style advisor, where you basically, I'm going to manage, produce the whole thing, introduce you directly to all the suppliers, show everything's transparent, you own relationships with everyone, everything we build is on your shared hard drives. I'll just manage the show and I'll help set up all the software and bring everything together and make sure that everything delivers on time and that everything's getting done for you, much like an employee would, but a much more ideally strategic, experienced senior employee than they could otherwise afford, kind of like a fractional access to a senior leader. And you're basically, that's the value prop. Hey, instead of hiring a CMO for 200,000 per year, you're going to hire me and us, and we're going to manage this whole thing for you and give you all the benefits and cost savings of overseas suppliers and local suppliers and finding the right mix of both to get the most bang for your buck every month, plus our expertise and our specialization and our skills. So usually it's going from dropping execution. Usually when you're getting full on execution, you keep those clients running. Maybe you convert a couple of them into a management style thing. Like I had a couple of clients, I had a bunch of clients, but one of them I converted into a kind of a fractional CMO style gig. And I said, hey, instead of me marking up everyone's time, let's just make them your suppliers now. I'll manage it for as long as you need, and then you can hire a full-time marketer and away you go. And that worked for a few years, and I got a second client did the exact same thing. So that's usually the best way, is to no longer do the implementation, but to then take the leads that still come in through your agency website and say, hey, instead of this, we're going to flip this model on its head. We're going to manage it for you, produce everything for you, help you do everything in a budget, but we're going to do it for a fixed fee. And we're going to be a collaborator with you to find the right implementation partners that we would normally mark up their time for, but now they're going to be yours. And then we'll stick around as long as you need us. And then we can either phase into a lower weight advisory thing after you've got everything set up, or you can hire an in-house marketer, or you can kind of take this on your own, or we can stick around as long as you want. But everything's for a fixed fee. And yeah, that's the best first step, I would say.
Yeah, in some ways it almost feels like you're saying, hey, how about instead of us interacting like we're two separate entities, how about we act like I'm just coming into your company for a limited period of time to help you basically own everything internally, which I could see that being a really valuable thing where people aren't thinking in terms of like, okay, yeah, we're going to hire the agency to do this, but where's the red tape, or where's the fine print that they're going to be keeping our data when the relationship's over or something like that.
Right.
Whereas if you say, you know what, like I'm basically going to come in and treat this like this was my company, and own things and basically have your best interest at heart throughout the entire process.
Yeah, and make sure you have email set up under your domain, and that email owns the access to all your ad accounts and everything else, and your Google Drive storage or your Dropbox, and all the files we work on are stored in your Drive, and all the relationships you're paying people directly. And so we could at any time get hit by the lottery, and you have retention of everything. Because I think a key risk for a company is when they're hiring a full service agency in particular, if that agency goes away or starts suffering, maybe they get too busy and they bring in some juniors and now they're learning there's always that risk of, well, do I have to replace the whole agency? And then, all that knowledge and retention is lost versus we've got a bunch of people, we've kind of diversified our talent pool to execute. And if one person goes, we have enough people here to kind of, maintain some of that knowledge over time. But it is a self-cannibalizing offer, and you do want to put that on its own separate website. And usually you can actually take leads for your agency and convert it into saying, hey, we don't actually take agency work anymore, but we have this new model, or I have this new model. Here it is over here. And it can work extraordinarily well. But yeah, it's a decision. Yeah, you have to make yourself.
Yeah. I was curious about that. If you felt like there was two different like types of or segments of the market that prefer one versus the other, but you kind of answered that a lot of times it's kind of like the same types of people would probably want to work either one way or the other, not like two different people who, sorry, I'm saying this in a weird way, but basically, it's not like, this segment of the market wants agency services and this segment wants fractional. It's like, well, actually, you probably want them all to be on the fractional side of things eventually.
Well, you could position it that way, or you can make a case that agencies are better because it's more convenient and more cohesive and all that kind of stuff. You can make a case either way, but yeah, at the end of the day, whether you're an agency or a fractional CMO or an advisor, and the last stage is, by the way, education. That's kind of the fourth piece, is being an educator, which is a highly leveraged way to sell your expertise, which you can dabble in as you do other things. But yeah, it's at the end of the day, it's how do we allocate our marketing budget most effectively? How do we work with the least risky people who are most likely to do the best quality work and get a financial return as quickly as possible? And so whether you're an agency or a fractional CMO, it's the same thing. One is like, look, we'll find the right partners for all your intricate little needs, and I'll help you do that for a fixed fee, and I'll manage that whole process, or I'll advise you on that process, which is my way to go now. I don't really do much fractional work or interim work anymore. Mostly it's just advising and teaching. But yeah, basically you always want to be thinking like the client has to spend this money anyway. They want to get a business result. What's the most likely successful way they're going to do it? And how do you make it the most mutually profitable for you? And you can take a lot of profit off the table as an advisor or fractional, especially if you're able to find people at various price levels to do execution. So you end up making very similar margins anyway, but it ends up being the experience ends up being very collaborative as opposed to almost confrontational. Like the clients trust you, but they also have to fend for themselves in an agency model a bit. They still have to do that a bit when you're advising, but not as much because they know your incentives are aligned. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit. I know you and I both have experience, in agencies, but I wanted to kind of get into the marketing of an agency. I've talked a lot about how it's a little bit of a different beast than typical B2B SaaS marketing, and you've kind of you've seen it from the agency side, but also from the consultant and advising side, both of which are services. So, what are your thoughts around maybe the differences between services marketing and SaaS marketing? And then, I don't know, what are some of what's some of the advice that you'd give to agency founders out there regarding their marketing?
I mean, at the end of the day, do you want to talk about the difference between agency and SaaS marketing, or just advice for founders? What's
Yeah, let's do agency and SaaS marketing differences.
Yeah, well, SaaS, it's really, I mean, the general sense is every dollar people spend, everything people buy has to serve a job to be done. And you have to figure out what that job really is. And sometimes it's de-risking, sometimes it's growing, sometimes it's creating more profit or efficiency or win back time. You always have to know what that job to be done is. So one is like selling a tool, and functionally, do I trust that this tool is going to help me do this in a more efficient manner, whatever reason I'm buying that, say, SaaS tool. Whereas when you're buying agency services, you're buying expertise. So it's really a similar idea, but they're usually different kind of mindsets. One is my people want to use the tools, and the other one is I want someone to help guide me through the unknown wilderness, if you will. It's kind of like having a map versus a guide to help you through it. Like both will help you maybe get a similar result, but a guide's going to say, "Oh, watch out for that thing which is poisonous," and the map just doesn't have that information. It's not readily available in the moment, and relevant to the immediate landscape as well as the long view. So really, you're selling the tool as a means to achieve the result that the client wants, versus expertise, and that's much about, first, how do we avoid harm so we don't waste money, time, energy, or go down the wrong path, right? And two is how are we then going to grow, and at what pace, and how are we going to mitigate these risks while leaning into our best opportunities, and that's basically making a bet on whether the guide or the agency, whoever, is going to get us there or not. Whereas the other one is more like, is this map accurate? Is this the best kind of map we can get today?
Right. So do you think that, when it comes to services marketing, it sounds like basically the more you can demonstrate your authority, that's going to be like a key aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, like using that guide analogy, right? If you're going to climb up Mount Everest, do you want someone who's a good, hiker, or do you want someone who goes up and down that mountain, every month, right? And knows and has hidden stashes of oxygen all the way up. And so that, like, the person who's most likely and has shown in the past that they've been most likely to help people in that same situation get to where they want to go is going to be the one that's going to get hired, even if they're more expensive. There's always a market for people who want to check boxes that says, "Hey, you've got running shoes, you can help me get up a mountain," right? There's always going to be that market, and they're usually not the clients you want. What you want are the clients who are like, "I want to get up that specific mountain over there. You seem to get people up and down that mountain all day. How do we hire you? How do we figure out how to get more money to do that if we need it?" And they're willing to spend more because at the end of the day, they probably rightfully know that that they're going to get there in a straighter line, fewer pitfalls. And that's not always the case, but that type of buyer tends to be a better buyer. They tend to be more successful overall. Maybe they've learned already about the ways of checking boxes and working with anyone with a pair of hiking boots. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's demonstrating that you've done that before, and de-risking. We're actually in the de-risking business,
Yeah.
as much as we are in the upside business. So very first is like, how do we not screw this up?
Yeah. And
And
almost give them more confidence in the process as well.
yeah, because usually people are, as entrepreneurs, you tend to be fairly confident in your product once they're hiring consultants and agencies already. They tend to know the product is pretty good. We just need to really lean into it more. So like, who's going to be who seems to be good at helping us allocate our resources? It's really a capital allocation game at the end of the day. As much as our technical and creative knowledge matters, it's how much money can we put into this thing and how much money can we get out of it over what time horizon. And that's how entrepreneurs think. And so as marketers, we need to think, how do we think like, capital allocators, where we're thinking about spreadsheets as much as, creative interpretation of our next ad campaign.
Yeah. As much as we're just thinking about like human psychology of the people we're talking to.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Whether people calculate it on a spreadsheet or not, they're making a judgment and a financial decision. And there's often an emotional component, like how I feel about this, and more confidence, so we can, really invest into things. And I can go out and do my part as an operator, and knowing that you're going to help really accelerate our growth by effectively communicating who we are and getting in the right places, spending our money wisely.
No,
But that's hard to do. That's the nut we have to crack as marketers of our services. And that's tough because we're so focused on being a technician that we lose sight of the entrepreneur's view, which is that we're an investment. And that's where we have to really kind of get out of our own, technician's mindset. If I built this intricate watch that ticks for 1,000 years without being wound up, I'm going to really want to talk about all those details. But what the person is buying is the story and the cachet that maybe comes with it. And we have to kind of take our lens off, take our goggles off for a second, and think like a client, and market as though in language that they care about at the level they care about, which is, how do I make good investment decisions and de-risk my business while then leaning into growing? And that's hard. you never know what you're going to get when you're hiring someone as a marketing like agency or professional. You just have to work with them. And so the best thing you can do as an agency is to show testimonials, case studies, proof of work, show your expertise, talk about examples you see around the world, teach as much as you can, give away all your knowledge as samples. And that de-risks the buying process, as opposed to like not having a website, not having any blog or other content that people can dive into, not having a podcast to listen to, not having that many testimonials or case studies, right? Then it's like, how do we know? There's no signals here that this is going to be a safe bet. And there's millions of people out there trying to sell stuff that just don't have enough credibility signals. And that takes years. It doesn't happen overnight, but yeah, that's what we want to be thinking. How do we de-risk the buying process for our clients?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned teaching as kind of one of those components. I think as we wrap up here, I'd love for you to tell people more about kind of what you're doing and how agency founders could maybe kind of become part of the community and things like that you've built.
Sure. Yeah. I'll touch briefly on my mindset around teaching, and I'll talk about kind of what I'm doing over there. But really, it's about when you're in the trenches doing the execution work and the strategy work and whatever else, you're producing work product, and people call it sawdust, and so those things become templates, they become learnings, they become examples. You might have a swipe file, you might have resources and repeatable methods of doing things, and you might find ways that succeed. So when you're in that doing, that's the best time to organize it, keep it into some kind of cohesive methodology. I use Trello to store all my best ideas, and and ultimately just have a really robust kind of idea library. I call it idea management, or a playbook, or a methodology. And then you can use that to teach it. You can teach it to your peers, which are other agencies who maybe are non-directly competing with you, but could use those tools. And a lot of people do that. And that's kind of what I've done with Mindshare. I have a membership that teaches other marketing consultants how to build solo practices. Or you can teach it to your clients who maybe can't afford you or want to learn how to do some of these skills themselves. So you can teach people to fish as opposed to just doing it for them. And so once you get a little bit busy, you're at that, now you're doing all the services you can without maybe scaling even further. Now you say, how do we sell our brains here? And that could be workshops, that could be training, that could be facilitation, that could be coaching, that could be, consulting. It could be memberships. It could be courses, digital products, books. And so those things are highly leveraged ways to sell your expertise. So you don't have to advise, you don't have to consult. You can literally have an agency and then spin off work product and teach at the same time. And that can be a really productive way to grow. So, and you can do that as part of your marketing as well, which is crucial. It's teaching your expertise, showing everything you have, and then paying and doing so for free. And then people pay you for implementation, which is how the world wants to work. They want to get information for free and get help with implementation. And so that's my mindset. That's what I'm working on. I do that over on my personal website at kevin.me. That's where I blog for consultants, soloists primarily. So not necessarily the agency crowd, but yeah, it's an evolution. How do you create more leverage and therefore profit in your business? And usually that means getting busy doing execution, and then maybe turning that into management, and then maybe advising, and then getting pickier as you go and getting more leveraged models as you go, or scaling a big agency, which is another way of creating leverage.
Yeah, definitely a harder route, I think, in many cases.
Totally. But all roads are hard, right? So it's a matter of
That's
like,
true.
what kind of hard do you want, and what's your lifestyle goals? And do you want to sell this thing in the future? Because it's impossible to sell, an advising business when ultimately it's your brain on the line, and you might be able to refer clients off, when you want to retire, but it's really difficult to do that. So it really depends. Individual goals.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for coming on the show. And if people want to follow up with you, where's the best place for them to follow you?
You head over to my personal website, kevin.me, and you'll see a link to my membership. But really, the newsletter is the kind of beating heart of my business, starting on YouTube as well. But the website is the main place. And I'm on X. But head over to the website. You'll have all the details on that one if you're interested.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, David. And best of luck with your podcast. I'm excited to see how the next episodes unfold.
Thanks. See ya.